loud snap. He's coming to an end and looked straight at Chris. I knew this day would come, the day where you would be on the other side rather than by mine, Zero said. The other side, Chris replied. You talk like I was the one that changed sides when you are the one working with the very person that killed your so-called dear pupil. You, Zero, have gone mad due to a promise from God that you don't even know. A promise that you're not even sure would work. Zero shook his head. You are now the one getting in the way of me bringing them back, my whole family. But don't worry, I shall finish you and bring you back as well, and then you can understand. In the end, it looked like Chris was unable to avoid a fight. Peter, are you ready? Chris asked. Peter was about to answer when he could see Erin open her mouth. I don't see your friend anywhere. Where is that despicable friend of yours? Peter was holding himself back because he remembered what had happened last time. You know who I'm talking about. Where is Quinn? I want to see him. Erin smiled. You! Peter's entire body was shaking, and the energy was taking him over as he began his transformation into his celestial form. Don't have permission to say his name. The bystanders that were watching.
This October 6th through 10th, don't miss history in the making. The Promise of Music is the first World Congress on the social impact of music, happening right here in Toronto. 5 powerful days of concerts, forums, and a cultural kaleidoscope with artists and leaders from across the globe. Be inspired, be transformed. Don't miss it. Tickets are selling fast at promiseofmusic.com. Reserve yours today.
To see anything that was going on in the fight. The amount of power in these fights, Vanessa commented. If they were fighting on Earth, I fear that the whole planet would have been destroyed. The others knew what she meant. Most of the time, these great energies and their attacks were just hitting each other, their own bodies, so it was hard to tell how much power was behind each strike. But the punch that Peter had delivered, Peter was already in his fully transformed state as he burst forward and ran across the field to get to the other's side. Although Peter looked the same in his current form as he did before, it was clear to Chris that the energy surrounding him was certainly different. When the two of them had fought against the Celestial before, the last punch that Peter had delivered had a large amount of Celestial points, given by Quinn in the final moments. The only thing was, Quinn had never taken those Celestial points back, and right now, Peter had well over 100,000 Celestial points, giving him enough energy that it would rival actual Celestials. As Peter ran, a radiating red aura was following him, looking almost like a copy of himself, just delayed by a fraction of a second. When he got close to the others, Peter leaped in the air and threw a punch on his way down. Erin swung her sword from below with a perfect measure of time. Although Peter was fast, Erin's actions and eyes could keep up with it. This was something she could always do due to the flow of energy she could see. People's energy was more honest than they were, allowing her to recognize what someone was going to do before they would do it, allowing her to keep up with even those that were faster than her. I'll chop your arm right off, Erin screamed as the sword clashed against Peter's arm. Rather than cutting through it like she expected, though, the sword stopped as it hit the strange black outer casing that Peter had on his arms. Die, bitch! Peter shouted back as his special head tail twisted and went right for a stab. Quickly skimming her sword off Peter's arm, she knocked the head tail away from piercing her armor. The head tail continued to attempt to stab her, and stepping back a few steps, Erin would move the large sword's position slightly, stopping the stab attacks from reaching her in time, one after another. This woman, I thought she was struggling against the Celestial before, so why is she doing well against me? Peter thought. My attack should be sending her to the moon, yet she is matching me back in strength, just like the time before. Blocking the head tail from attacking again, it was now moving considerably slower compared to what it was before. Peter tried to twist the tail and noticed that it was slightly frozen. The sword's power. She's been using it this whole time, bit by bit to freeze my head tail. You might have gotten better at fighting, stronger in your hits, and faster, but still after all this time, you don't think when you're fighting. Erin twisted the handle on the sword, and the first ring lit up. Swinging it downward, a whole tunnel of flames hit Peter, sending him back. An intense heat was felt all over his body, and Erin could hear yelling but was unable to see anything. Using her ability instead, she could see Peter's energy through the flames. The tunnel was still swirling around his body, yet the flames were no longer pushing Peter back, and instead herself in the air from a bounce and landed on her feet holding her chest. The armor wasn't damaged, but the blow was still felt, having gone through it slightly. "So what?" Peter shouted. "It worked for me so far, and it will work for me now as well." Not too far away from where Peter and Aaron had started their fight, Chris and Zero were standing opposite each other, around 10 yards away. Neither of them had made the first move yet. "What's wrong?" Zero eventually spoke. "You managed to summon up the will to go against me, but when reality sinks in and push comes to shove, you can't attack me?" Chris didn't know what to say. He was still in his partially transformed, werewolf-like state. His breathing was slightly heavier in this form. "You should know you won't succeed," Chris spoke. "There is no need for us to fight if your task is already going to fail." Zero laughed as he kept his sword in his sheath and took a step forward. It was the same stance that he had taken when he was ready to fight out against Gorgath. "And who is going to stop me? That crazy undead man? You? I was the one that made you as strong as you are today. Do you really think that I would willingly make you stronger than me? I had a hunch that you might turn on me one day, or disagree with my methods. There is a saying that if you want things done, then you need to do them yourself. But please feel free to stay and do nothing, because right about now, Agent 4 will be completing the long and awaited task that had been given to me by him, and finally I will get my wish." Hearing these words, Chris knew he had to act. He had to stop Agent 4 from doing whatever it was he was doing. His claws elongated, his legs bulged and grew in size as Chris launched from his position, reaching Zero, who pulled out the sword from his sheath. "A 1,500,000 soul key strike!" At the same time, Chris swung his hand. "I know his ability. Even if I dodge this attack, it will hit me regardless. So the best thing to do when fighting against Zero is to go head-to-head, and in this body, that's the best thing for me." The large furry arm struck right against the sword, and a glow appeared between the two strikes of power. Both of them were using immense amounts of ki. Zero's strike had more ki due to all of those that he had absorbed over the years, while Chris had a large ball of energy that engulfed the two of them inside, not allowing the bystanders that were watching to see anything that was going on in the fight. "The amount of power in these fights," Vanessa commented. "If they were fighting on Earth, I fear that the whole planet would have been destroyed." The others knew what she meant. Most of the time, these great energies in their attacks were just hitting each other, their own bodies, so it was hard to tell how much power was behind each strike. But if these attacks were directed towards the planet, towards the destruction of the planet, it would be a simple thing for these people to defeat demon-tier beasts and still have land that had survived their wrath. In a different location, but on the same planet, Agent 4 had finally reached his destination. The strange device that he had brought with him showed that the energy readings in this particular area were going drastically up and then settling back down. Currently, he was on a peak of a relatively small mountain. The spire at the top didn't pierce the clouds or anything like that, but instead it was a special point. Standing at the top, looking towards one area of the planet, lightning could be seen striking the ground constantly. In another section, large amounts of lava were spewing from the floor, heavy rain in the next, and so on. The planet was a strange one, but at this point, it was calmer than ever, yet one could see all of the chaos that was going on everywhere else. This is it, the point where it connects with the other realm of the Celestials. I can feel it. Even the red heart is radiating in and out with power, Agent 4 thought. There was a reason why we chose this planet in the first place, and this is the location where Immortui told us to put the red heart. On top of the mountain, there was quite a flat surface, and carrying the red heart, Agent 4 placed it down. After that, he pulled out a piece of white chalk. "Look at me, a man of science dabbling in magic. Since Zero passed on the secret of immortality to me, he has allowed me to stay in this world for as long as I wish, through the key brain. So, I will do as he asks and return the favor." Smiling, Agent 4 began to draw a circle around the red heart, and started to draw the shapes and symbols that he had been told to memorize. Now that there were two fights going on at once, AJ was trying his best to film both of them without getting his equipment destroyed. Even though the drones had gone through improvements, allowing them to survive through storms, a high degree of heat, and so on, there was always a chance for them to break. In the past, they had broken and they had been improved upon, but a single direct hit from any of those four fighting, and he knew he would lose his precious footage. "It's a good thing that all of the recorded footage automatically backs up onto a server, so I will never lose it. These drones cost an arm and a leg. I guess I just have to be careful." Most of the drones that were being used were covering Peter's and Aaron's fight, but the direct camera that AJ was using, he was focusing on Chris and Zero. Using his ability, he was running around getting the perfect shots and getting in and out of the range of their fighting. Shock waves from the attacks from the fight would hit him, now and then, but he just had to suck it up and continue on. The large ball of energy that was covering the two of them had started to disappear, yet strong shock waves were still coming out from the area, and several loud bangs were heard afterwards. Now that he could see, AJ could tell that the fight was still going on between the two of them. The sword was clashing against his claws, and a display like no other of physical and sword mastery was being put on. A swing from Chris's claw went right for Zero's face before it was knocked away and hit to the side. Although it looked like there was nothing on Chris's hands, and it was just a normal swing, 5 large lines appeared in the ground not too far away from where they were fighting. Seeing another strike, Zero swirled around to the side of Chris trying to move away, but knew it wouldn't be quite enough. With his other hand free, he threw it out. A strong invisible force was felt that had pushed Chris slightly away. It didn't hurt him in any way, but just moved him slightly out of position. The third stage of Ki. Zero is probably the most skilled person in the world when it comes to Ki, and the one with the most amount of Ki right now. I have to think of all the possibilities, all the things he could do when fighting with Ki. Just as Chris turned back around to face Zero, he could see a large slash of Ki heading his way. 100,000 soul Ki strike! The attack had hit Chris's chest, piercing him slightly. Before the attack could go any deeper, he let out a large howl and used both of his hands, almost ripping the strike apart. Chris's face started to transform even more, elongating and looking less like a human and more like a werewolf. The next moment, the attack was shattered. I see now that you have no problems with killing me, and that I should have the same mentality, Chris shouted in anger. Bracing himself, Zero quickly threw out 2 strikes behind him with his sword. It looked almost like he was displaying some type of moveset as he swung his sword here, there, and other places, while shooting out the aura of Ki, yet none of them were directed at Chris. Holding his sword steady, it lit up pink now compared to before, and he stood there waiting for the other to attack. Out of anger, with another howl, Chris started to swing his arms in the air. Several lines of energy, like a large scratch mark, appeared in the air and were heading straight for Zero. Condensing the energy to only be used in his sword, Zero swung it, breaking right through the energy claw marks. Swinging again and again, Zero broke one after another with his sword. However, the attacks were strong, as each time the attack hit, even though he was breaking them, he was being moved back further and further. There was more pressure being put on Zero, and he had to put more effort to stop the claw attacks. Although Zero's sword and Ki were doing well against the attacks, his arms were feeling a bit heavy and numb from the weight of the attacks. When the barrage of attacks was finally over, Zero looked forward and noticed Chris was no longer there. "Turn around!" Chris shouted, as he pulled Zero's shoulder so the front of his body was facing him, and before Zero could react, Chris delivered a strong, large fist right to his stomach, hitting him in the air. Before Zero could get away from Chris, he leaped up, now above him. Zero had spun around desperately, throwing out sword strikes of Ki here and there, but with a slight tilt of his head, Chris was able to avoid it. With both of his hands held together, Chris then slammed it down, right on top of Zero's body, sending him crashing into the ground. "I know your Ki is strong. I know your second stage and the first stage will protect you from all of that. There is a lot more that I need to do to finish you off." Swinging his arms again, the claws of energy went straight to where Zero had crashed. They started to rip into the ground and were shaking the whole floor around them each time the attacks hit. "I know he has a lot of Ki, but he just got off from fighting the Celestial. If I keep attacking him, eventually his second stage Ki barrier should be down. The smart thing to do after that is leave the first stage of Ki to empower the body and heal the wounds. Once all of that Ki is gone as well, he won't be able to attack anymore. I will make this a fight about who will last longer, and if that is the case, then my werewolf body will win." AJ, who continued to film it all, couldn't believe the display of powers that were being put on right now. The reason why he had personally been filming Chris's and Zero's fight was because he thought it made a better headline at the end of the day. "The 2 top leaders of Pure go head-to-head, a display of pure power." It was a bad pun for a headline, but sometimes it needed to be done. The attacks were relentless from Chris, as he continued to swing his arms in the air, each time chucking out a claw of energy. At first, there was quite a bit of dust from the original set of attacks. Something strange then started to occur. The ground was no longer shaking, even though Chris was still attacking even at this moment. The dust around the area was starting to settle, which was allowing them to see what was going on. As it did, a sight that no one expected had occurred. Even Chris had a sweat on the side of his face, but continued to swing his arms as he watched this. Standing in the crater, Zero had his hand held up, and around a yard away from his body, all of the strikes that Chris was throwing were just hitting a type of invisible wall. It looked like there was a type of barrier that was around Zero, one that didn't allow any of Chris's attacks to touch him. You have a superhuman body that can heal nearly anything. You have great strength, speed, and a ridiculous amount of ki. These things are even things that I wish I had. However, I would have never subjected myself to becoming something like you. I would feel less like myself. I wish to do everything with my own strength, Zero claimed. Own strength, Chris shouted, as he gave out a bigger swing than before, and a large claw strike went straight towards Zero. It hit the strange barrier just like before, but this time there was a slight squint in Zero's eyes and a bend in his knees. Your own power? You mean all the power that you stole from others? Have you really sunk so far that you don't even realize that? Chris shouted. Do you see anyone by my side right now? Zero replied. This is my own power. Moving his hand away, Zero started to run, moving away from Chris's claw strikes. While running, he was swinging his blade once again, not aiming for Chris, but just aiming in his general direction as he swung and swung. Chris landed on the ground and was ready to go toe-to-toe with Zero once again. But that's when, of all people, AJ noticed something. No! Why didn't I notice it sooner? This is what Zero was trying to do? AJ thought. AJ was so engrossed in the fight that he was unable to notice what had been happening so far, the subtle things that a particular person was doing so far. It was only now that he was watching the fight through the camera that he was able to see things from a much wider perspective. If only I had noticed it sooner, if I could have told Chris, then he might have been able to come out of this one top, AJ told himself. Although, thinking about it more, would it really have been much help? How would AJ even communicate the trouble that he could see from so far away without disturbing or distracting Chris? All I can do now is pray that you get through this. You are the hope of this group in the end, AJ thought. Landing on the ground, Chris was still confident. The fact that Zero had created a barrier of what he could only suspect was ki meant that he was draining Zero out bit by bit. This is good. There is no need for me to use the fourth stage, nor is there the need for me to transform completely into a wolf. This body uses the least amount of energy, allowing me to be at my strongest, and is the best at healing itself. This fight, I can win this one. Zero continued to run around the place, swinging his sword bit by bit, and that's when Chris went directly towards him once again. Two large strikes of energy went towards Chris, but missed him, as Chris moved from side to side, easily avoiding the attacks. He jumped one way, then the other, and with the third jump, headed straight towards Zero. Where are you trying to hit? Chris yelled, as he bashed Zero with both his hands, but had hit nothing but the blade, sending him back. I thought I mentored you better than this. In all honesty, I never thought that out of everything that this would be your downfall, Zero stated. Be aware of your surroundings. Zero had placed his sword in the sheath again, which meant he would be storing up power for a large attack. However, if that was the case, then it meant Zero had to be confident that Chris was unable to attack or touch him. Seeing this was ringing alarm bells in his head and made him not step forward for a second. Instead, Chris started to look around to see if there was any kind of trap that had been set up. A little too slow, don't you think? Zero chuckled. What do I do? Chris thought. Now, when looking around in the air, there were several ki strikes all over, in the air. They were there just hovering in place and floating about. This was all due to Zero's ability. His ability, which allowed him to not only hit his target no matter what, but it also allowed him to control his attacks, a bit like how vampires could use blood control. His ki attacks were floating in place, just waiting for Zero's ability to be activated on Chris, and at any moment, no matter what, these 50 or so powerful ki strikes would all come towards Chris at once, hitting him no matter what. Fine, bring it on, Chris shouted. Stretching his arms out by his side and spreading his legs, Chris had seen Zero's ability, and he knew that there was no chance for him to run away. The best thing to do was to face them head on. Let's see how you do, Zero stated, as his ability was activated and all of the strikes were now moving towards Chris from every possible angle. Some of the attacks were a little behind others, so they wouldn't be hitting him at the same time, and that was what Chris needed to rely on. As the aura came in and struck him, he swung his arms at two of them as hard as he could, aiming to cancel out the attack. He had done a good job, but it was pointless. At the same time, several slashes hit his legs, hit his back, and hit the other parts of his body. The slashes were piercing his tough hide, going through the ki that he had. I have to fight this, Chris thought as he looked up into the sky and let out a large howl of energy. Woo! Chris shouted, trying to activate all of the ki in his body to reinforce it. In his werewolf form, it was better to use the first stage of ki to improve his body capabilities rather than the second stage as a barrier. All he could hope for was to minimize the damage of the attacks and increase the healing of his body. However, the slashes of energy continued. There wasn't just one wave, but there seemed to be several more waves of attacks. They were piercing through his skin, pushing him back, his body trying to heal as the slashes of power hit the inside of him. Ah! Chris continued to scream. I can't lose here. I can't die here. Not when I have finally just started to live. Chris began to swing his hand, trying to destroy the ki attacks coming towards him. He was taking a step forward as more slashes were hitting him, still piercing his body, and his blood was dripping on the floor. Come on, Chris, AJ shouted. The whole world is counting on you. Take out this damn fake. Chris swung his hand hard, but got hit by 10 more slashes that were just directed toward his arm as well. He was sure by now the attacks had to be over, only a few more seconds at least. Just starting to live, Zero repeated. Don't worry, after I am done with you here, I promise I will bring you back, and then you will see the light and see how right I was. Unleashing his sword out from his sheath, Zero threw out a devastating attack. A 1,600,000 soul ki strike, Zero shouted. The line of aura that came out was larger, more condensed, and more powerful compared to before. On top of that, straight after, Zero swung his sword a few more times, throwing more of the ki strikes, but with lesser energy, out towards Chris. The attacks were still hitting Chris non-stop, but he could see the large attack coming his way. I have to focus on stopping this. If I don't stop this one, it will be a real problem. I have to, Chris thought as he readied both of his hands. He concentrated his ki, moving it to his hands, but in doing so, the other attacks were able to pierce his body deeper than they would have done. Regardless, Chris didn't flinch, he didn't run, because any of these types of thoughts would just make things worse. If I'm going to that damn place, then I will at least take you with me, Chris shouted, throwing both of his fists together, hitting the attack from Zero at the right time. It stopped it in its tracks, breaking the attack, showing that Chris was no weaker in terms of power. However, the following attacks hit Chris right on his chest, and following that, with his energy low, he was chucked onto the ground and fell over backwards. The attacks had stopped, but with all of the cuts, covering nearly every inch of Chris's body, it was hard to believe he was still alive, yet he still got up off the ground with blood dripping from his wounds. Chris! AJ couldn't help but call out, and an overwhelming amount of emotions were coming over him. You can... Stop, Chris, you don't have to get up again. You've done enough. You have already fought so hard. Look at us, Zero said. There is still not a single wound on my body. I know what your plan was. With your strength, you were planning to outlast me. After the last fight, you probably thought I was low on ki. If I just ran out of ki and you were able to land a few hits on me, the fight would be over, right? Although that was a good train of thought to have, as you can tell, I still have plenty of power. Chris coughed, and a large chunk of thick blood and mucus came out onto the floor. How many more lives did you take behind my back to have this much power? Chris said. I can't believe for so long I worked for a monster like you. I was wrong about you, and I was wrong about trying to outlast you, so it's time to just go all out. A ball of energy was summoned out of Chris's chest. His wounds weren't healing fast anymore, and he was still in his werewolf form, but something strange was starting to happen as the energy from his chest spread out through his entire body. His skin, no, not only his skin, but the gray fur all over his body was starting to turn red. Stage 4 ki. With my werewolf form using both of my powers at their maximum potential. It might take every last single drop of energy from my body, but now I can see that's what it will take to beat you. AJ had never seen such a beautiful sight before. A red werewolf. Peter and Aaron's fight was in no way a comfortable one for either of them, although Peter now had a lot more celestial energy than last time, which powered him up in a certain way. It didn't do much.
Welcome to Doom Debates. I'm Liron Shapira, and I'm an AI doomer. I think there's a high probability that within our lifetimes, all of humanity...
Against Aaron. Even though he had landed a full-blown hit right on her, it was clear that she was fine, and he would have to try harder if he wished to get the upper hand in this battle. However, if there was one thing that Peter was, it was relentless, as he didn't give her a second to recover, and had already resumed raining down his fists upon her, throwing them one after another before she could even react. Your body probably still hasn't even fully healed yet, and yet you are still trying to attack me. Keeping the sword in its flame state, Aaron felt the need to do more damage. While the ice sword would perhaps slow down the intensity of Peter's attacks, she knew it wouldn't do much in terms of dealing actual damage to him. Thus, swinging her sword, she tried to hit the skin of Peter's knuckles. It was still impossible for her sword to cut through the strange black substance that Peter had covering his knuckles with, for some reason, but the flames coming from each strike would do something as they twirled from the sword and were directed right towards Peter's chest, pushing him back slightly every time. The sword only emits flames when swung, but if I use the third stage of ki, I can redirect the flames to more vital points and continue to hurt Peter in this way. Aaron quickly thought of a plan. However, just like before, Peter didn't seem to care about the flames that were burning on his body, and he threw out two fists at the same time, firing them off like a shotgun, full of power and might. There was only one way Aaron could think of to block this attack. Therefore, while swinging her sword again to skin both of Peter's arms, she herself leapt up into the air through the momentum of the sword. Damn it! This undead can use ki as well. Even if I had blocked the attack, the power and shockwave would have still hit me. Since when did he get so smart? The thing was, Peter wasn't thinking about what he was doing at all. He had only one thought on his mind, and that was the fuel behind his aggression. Kill! 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 I need to kill her. That way Quinn won't have to. If I get rid of her here, then he won't have any guilt for doing so. I have to do this. I must take her down. While in the air, Aaron had forgotten about a small detail. The head tail raised up and whacked her right on the side of her armor where her ribs would be. The strike from the head tail was just as strong as if Peter himself was swinging a sword. Before her body could be flung off to the side, he grabbed her by the foot and swung her by her ankle, slamming her right onto the ground, creating a sizable crater from the impact. I'm not done yet, Peter shouted, as he lifted her by the foot again, ready to slam her into another area of the ground. But suddenly, Peter felt like he was no longer holding anything, and as he finished his motion, there was nothing in his hands. Where did she go? Peter thought as he looked around. Looking at his hand, he still didn't understand. He had a tight grip and was sure she hadn't gotten out of it, and yet she had somehow managed to slip through. You people are annoying. In fact, it seems like you and Chris are the only annoying ones that are currently here, so I guess it won't be that big of a problem, Aaron said. You are strong, but I can tell this is the limit to your strength. You have no trump card and nothing through which you can use to turn the situation around. Whereas for me, it's different. You haven't even forced me to the limit. Right now, Aaron was sitting on top of a large black horse with a strange greenish-blue glow coming out from its body and its nostrils. AJ and the other vampires were wondering where it had come from. They had no clue what this horse was, but that wasn't the case for Peter. He knew. I was wondering when you were going to use them. Peter gritted his teeth as he curled his hand into a fist. Without a doubt, this was one of the four kings that he had seen before, and Aaron had control of all four of them. There was still a lot more that Peter needed to do in this fight if he wanted to win. For Aaron, the four kings were something that she had refused to use in the fight against the Celestial. She had learned multiple times that she always needed something to protect her. If the past was anything to go by, she had seen time and time again how people would die by giving it their all too soon. So she would never fully overexert herself and leave herself open if she had to. If it came to it, she would even try to run away from a fight before using all of her energy. With Peter in front of her, though, Aaron had concluded if she wanted to get rid of him, she only needed to use a bit more strength. She would still have room and power to get rid of the rest of them safely. As for Peter, he knew Aaron was right. He didn't have any trump cards, he just had his fist that he needed to rely on. There was one thing that could help him, but they had...
Body of the young man.
back on the ship. Laxmus, in the end, was a lesser white, but he was someone who still carried his vampire. He knew. I was wondering when you were going to use them. Peter gritted his teeth as he curled his hand into a fist. Without a doubt, this was one of the 4 kings that he had seen before, and Aaron had control of all 4 of them. There was still a lot more that Peter needed to do in this fight if he wanted to win. For Aaron, the 4 kings were something that she had refused to use in the fight against the Celestial. She had learned multiple times that she always needed something to protect her. If the past was anything to go by, she had seen time and time again how people would die by giving it their all too soon. So she would never fully